Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I didn't need a long preview to know something had changed. The moment I saw Jason again, I had that feeling in my gut that this wasn't the same man who walked into danger without blinking. Sometimes a person can survive the bullets and the explosions, but it's the quiet moments afterward that leave the deepest scars. Around here, we like to say that'll leave a mark, and I think that's exactly where Jason is now. The more I thought about everything that happened inside that WSB prison in Jakarta, the more convinced I became that those months didn't just lock Jason behind bars. They trapped his mind. I can only imagine the endless days, the rough treatment, and the loneliness eating away at him. Folks always call Jason the toughest guy in Port Charles, but even the strongest man has a breaking point. That's just human nature. What really caught my attention is that Jason had nothing but time to think. A man sitting alone with his thoughts can come to some painful conclusions. I honestly believe he kept replaying one thing over and over in his head, Danny. Since Sam is gone, Danny doesn't have his mother anymore. Jason is all that boy has left, and I can't shake the feeling that Jason now sees every lost day as another day he wasn't there for his son. When I look back at everything that led Jason into this nightmare, I can't ignore Britt's role in the chain of events. I'm not blaming her for what happened, not completely anyway, but I do think Jason may look at it differently now. If he had never gotten pulled into that situation surrounding Britt, maybe he never would have ended up in WSB custody. That's the kind of thought that can haunt a man when he's lying awake at night with nothing but regret for company. Then there's Rocco. I still believe Jason did the honorable thing by taking responsibility after Ross Cullum was shot. He stepped in to protect a young man from carrying that burden. That's the Jason I've respected for years. But here's the difference that keeps sticking with me. Rocco still has both Dante and Lulu to lean on. Danny doesn't have that safety net. Danny has Jason and only Jason. You know what keeps running through my mind? Trauma changes priorities. I've seen it happen in real life more times than I can count. A person walks away from something terrible, and suddenly all the things that once seemed important don't matter anymore. The money, the reputation, the dangerous lifestyle, it all starts looking pretty small compared to the people waiting for you at home. That's why I wouldn't be shocked if Jason starts pulling away from Sonny's organization. I know that sounds almost impossible because Jason has stood beside Sonny through just about everything. Their loyalty has been one of the strongest foundations of General Hospital for years. But there comes a point when even lifelong loyalty has to compete with fatherhood. If Jason believes staying in the mob keeps putting Danny at risk, I honestly think he'll choose his son every single time. And yes, that also makes me wonder about Britt. I've enjoyed watching those two reconnect because there's always been something genuine between them. Britt understands Jason in ways few people ever could, but love asks for sacrifices, and sometimes the greatest sacrifice is walking away from the life that brought two people together in the first place. If Jason decides that Danny needs him more than anyone else does, Britt may end up watching him leave even if neither of them truly wants that outcome. I also can't ignore the possibility that Jason may be dealing with PTSD. General Hospital has touched on emotional trauma before, but this feels different to me. I don't expect Jason to suddenly become emotional overnight. That's never been who he is. Instead, I think we'll see it in the little things, the sleepless nights, the moments when he's lost in thought, the hesitation before making decisions he once made without thinking twice. Sometimes the quietest pain tells the biggest story. At the end of the day, I don't think this comeback is really about Jason escaping prison. I think it's about Jason trying to figure out who he wants to be after surviving it. For years, he believed protecting people meant carrying a gun and standing beside Sonny. Now he may discover that protecting Danny means putting that life behind him for good. If that's the direction this story is heading, I have to admit I'm all in. After everything Jason has sacrificed over the years, maybe it's finally time for him to stop living for everyone else and start living for the one person who still needs his father the most. As we say over here, sometimes life gives you a wake-up call. If WSB was Jason's wake-up call, Port Charles may never see the same Jason Morgan again. The more I think about Jason's return, the more convinced I become that this story has very little to do with escaping a WSB prison and everything to do with what was happening inside his own mind while he was locked away. I can only imagine what those long months must have felt like. Jason has spent most of his adult life moving from one dangerous situation to another, always focused on protecting someone else or cleaning up another crisis. Suddenly, all of that disappeared. There were no missions to distract him, no Sonny to stand beside, and no way to throw himself into another problem. All he had were endless hours to think about the choices he had made and the people he had left behind. If you ask me, that's a prison far more difficult to survive than the concrete walls around him. A man who has spent decades avoiding his emotions doesn't suddenly stop feeling them. He simply keeps burying them until life refuses to let him anymore, and I believe that's exactly what finally happened to Jason. The person I keep coming back to is Danny. Ever since Sam died, that young man has been trying to figure out life without the two people he needed most. Losing his mother was heartbreaking enough, but then his father disappeared into WSB custody, leaving Danny to face one challenge after another without the guidance he desperately needed. The older I get, the more I realize children don't always tell us when they're hurting. Instead, they start making decisions that reveal just how lost they really are. Looking back at everything Danny has done over the past several months, I don't see a reckless teenager looking for trouble. I see a son trying to become the man he has admired his entire life, even if he doesn't fully understand the price that comes with living that kind of life. That's why Danny's recent choices worry me so much. We watched him approach Sonny about working in the mob, and I don't think that happened because Danny was fascinated by organized crime itself. I think it happened because, in his mind, that's where his father belonged. Jason has always been the strongest man Danny has ever known, so it makes perfect sense that Danny would try to follow the same path. Unfortunately, he doesn't see the years of pain, sacrifice, loneliness, and regret that came with Jason's reputation. He only sees the courage and loyalty. Then things became even more dangerous. When Danny found himself caught up in WSB trouble, faced consequences for trespassing, and eventually became involved in the mission to Spoon Island during the effort to bring down Ross Cullum. Every one of those moments makes me wonder how differently things might have unfolded if Jason had simply been home where Danny needed him most. If I were Jason, I don't think I'd come home asking why Danny made those mistakes. I'd spend far more time asking myself why my son felt he had to make them in the first place. That's a much harder question because it forces a parent to look in the mirror instead of pointing fingers. Jason has always believed that protecting his family meant risking his own life for Sonny and keeping danger away from the people he loved. After everything that's happened, though, I think he's finally beginning to understand that emotional absence can hurt a child just as deeply as physical danger. A father can provide money, protection, and security, but none of those things can replace simply being there day after day. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't rescuing someone from danger. Sometimes it's sitting across the dinner table, listening to them, and making sure they never have to face life's biggest questions alone. That's why I honestly believe Jason's priorities are about to change in ways we've never seen before. I don't expect him to stop caring about Sonny, and I certainly don't believe he'll suddenly forget everything they've been through together. Their friendship has survived too much for that. At the same time, surviving months inside a brutal WSB prison has probably given Jason a perspective he never had before. When a man comes that close to losing everything, he starts separating what truly matters from what only felt important in the moment. I wouldn't be surprised if Jason realizes that every dangerous mission he accepts, every favor he does for Sonny, and every sacrifice he makes also takes precious time away from Danny. Those are moments a father never gets back, and I think Jason finally understands that. The same reasoning applies to Britt. As much as I enjoy seeing those two together, I don't believe romance will be Jason's focus when he first returns to Port Charles. Britt represents hope, happiness, and a chance to build something meaningful, but Jason may feel that he hasn't earned any of those things until he repairs the relationship with his son. Danny has spent far too long feeling abandoned, and I can't imagine Jason wanting to repeat that mistake. If he has to put his feelings for Britt aside while he rebuilds his family, I think he'll make that decision without hesitation because for the first time in many years, being a father may become more important than every other role he has ever played. When I put all of these pieces together, I can't help feeling that we're about to meet a completely different Jason Morgan, not because prison made him weaker, but because it forced him to recognize what he has been overlooking for years. I don't think his greatest challenge will be facing another enemy or surviving another dangerous mission. His greatest challenge will be earning back the trust of a son who has spent far too much of his young life trying to become someone he never should have had to imitate. If Jason truly makes Danny the center of his world from this point forward, then I believe this won't just be another comeback story. It'll be the beginning of the most meaningful chapter Jason Morgan has ever lived. And personally, I think that's a story worth telling.